not our presentation.
Hello again. Hi, this is Raul Smith, and I welcome everyone to the Closing Tag podcast. This is episode 9. Don't really have a name. There's not a whole lot that's going on this show. We do touch on some unscripted points here and there as far as basketball is concerned, but mostly this interview pretty much takes up the entire episode. And I could not be more delighted. The man is a very awesome podcaster. He's awesome at what he does. I listen to his show regularly. His name is James Scott. He is from the Across the Pond Sports Podcast, which you'll hear from him later in the episode. That podcast is just a small piece of a much larger puzzle. He's been in the podcast business since last year. He emphasizes that he did not do this because of boredom, because of the pandemic. He did this because it's something that he loves doing, which I can relate. And he's fanatic about sports. Describes how he became a Jazz fan. He describes, kind of the football culture in England, and basically describes, who he thinks is going to end up taking, pretty much the NBA title. He also touches a little bit on football, where Julio Jones may wind up, where Aaron Rodgers potentially may wind up. And, it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun listening to him. It was a lot of fun talking to him. And I just wanted to say, right at the very beginning of the pod, that this podcast is sponsored by Galactic Blue, your professional web development, graphic design, and logo design resource. Visit galacticblue.net for more information on how your business can benefit from our services, as well as the Telltale Heart, based on the short novel from Edgar Allan Poe and from the creative and brilliant mind of McLean Lundquist, comes the most frightening deep dive into the sea of madness. Already racking up multiple awards across the indie and short film sector, even as recently as this past week. Visit telltalemovie.com for more information on that. And without further ado, I present episode 9, which is mostly an interview episode. My interview with James Scott from Across the Pond. Hopefully you enjoy. So it is with great honor and privilege that I introduce our first guest on the Closing Tag podcast. He's a good colleague, fellow sports nerd, fellow Jazz fan, and a fellow podcaster. His podcast, the Across the Pond Sports Podcast, takes a look at American sports from the outside and can be found pretty much wherever you're downloading this podcast from. James Scott is my guest. James, a pleasure to talk to you, sir. How are you doing today?
I'm doing awesome. And it's so weird because we've talked online for years now, for at least 4 or 5 years, and fan groups of the Jazz. And now here we are actually doing a podcast. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah. I love it. And since you brought that up, let's dive right into it. I know you're as anxious as I am to talk about this. So before the season, I had the Jazz pegged as the number 3 team in the West behind both of the LA teams. First, are you as pleasantly surprised as I am that they're doing as well as they are? And second, now that Donovan Mitchell's back in the lineup, what are your thoughts as far as the Jazz odds are in what they have to win the West and maybe the entire championship?
I think when I looked at it at the beginning of the season, I was hopeful. I mean, you always, as a fan of a particular team, you're always hopeful that they're going to do well. I had them top 5. I thought that was a realistic, behind the LA teams. And sometimes like Denver have been really good. Jokic is no joke, and he is like he's a bit of a kryptonite for the Jazz at times. So I really did think that we would have a good season. I thought it would be a solid playoff season. I know they've got this new play-in thing. I thought, yeah, we'll skip that, thankfully. But to finish first with the best record in the NBA, and to finish first in a Western Conference that is loaded,
Oh yeah.
absolutely loaded, it is pretty impressive. I mean, you've got like the Dallas Mavericks, who are just an up and coming young team, a lot like the Jazz, probably were maybe a year or two ago.
Oh
They've
yeah.
got a young core and some vets in there, and it's a well built team. I thought, and my co-host on our NBA shows, he thought as well. You know, the Mavericks would be in the playoffs quite comfortably as well. So I think we did really well, and I think we've exceeded expectations. But obviously now it's where it counts. It's the playoffs.
Yep. Yeah. And for me personally, like you said, the expectations just got completely shattered by All-Star break for me. And I actually think they obviously have a really good chance to win tonight and, take the series against Memphis eventually. But I also think they have a good shot at Dallas. The Clippers, I'm a little skittish on just because, let's address the elephant in the room. The referees are probably going to, favor the Clippers in that one. Um, and then who knows? I mean, if they could face Phoenix, they could face the Lakers, which I'll touch on that in a bit. They could face Denver, as you mentioned, with Nikola Jokic. That dude's just a beast. Almost assuredly going to win the MVP.
He is so good, and I think as well from a basketball fan perspective as well. Like technically, he's so good. Like he just the way he moves. I mean, someone of his size really shouldn't move as well as he does. He is a big dude, and not just in height, but like in kind of weight as well. But he carries it with him so well. I mean, I remember when Doncic came into the league, everyone was like, "Oh yeah, he's still got his baby fat kind of carrying around with him." But again, he was someone else that he moved it pretty well. It didn't really affect him. I think having Donovan Mitchell back for us, game one was a tough loss, but having Donovan Mitchell come back, he has been a difference maker. But I think not just in his play, I think his leadership. Something that's been apparent over the last couple of years is for such a young guy, he is a born leader, and he was the right guy to draft. I mean, I'm sure teams that drafted before the Utah Jazz are probably kind of kicking themselves a bit because they missed out on someone who is an absolute born leader, and he shows up. He wears his heart on his sleeve, which I think is what Jazz fans always appreciate, is a guy that wears his heart on his sleeve and will give his all. I think that's why Joe Ingles is popular. I think that's why Rudy Gobert is popular, because these guys all play with a lot of heart, and it's a bit cliche sometimes to say that, but those guys really do.
Yeah, they do. I know Detroit's definitely kicking themselves, repeatedly. I still can't get that image out of my head of him just pointing at the Detroit fan in that one game, just, talking all sorts of trash. I love it. So on the flip side, I guess one could argue the greatest disappointment of the season has to be the defending champions, the Lakers. Going from world beaters and winning the championship to having to win the play-in game just to make the playoffs, and now they're tied 2-2 with Phoenix, and LeBron's still dealing with his issues. Anthony Davis is likely going to miss Game 5 because of his issues. Are we looking at a very realistic possibility that LeBron James could lose his first ever first round matchup?
I think this is something that has been in the offing since the regular season, when he got injured, and then AD gets injured, and then other kind of key players that they have get injured. And I think we've seen it with the Golden State Warriors. Once a kind of key component goes down, Klay Thompson, for example, that really does shake a team. LeBron is a generational player, and for someone like him to be playing at the age he is at the moment, and also he hasn't actually had that many injuries throughout his career. He's done really well. He's looked after his body. He's like cryogenic state after every game. So like he has done really well to look after himself and stave off injuries and have this long career. However, Father Time catches up with everyone. Father Time is undefeated. So there is going to come a point where his body says, you know what, enough's enough. He has done an amazing job keeping himself fit. The thing I look at is when AD and LeBron don't play, the Lakers are 8-12. When LeBron's playing and AD isn't, they're 11-10. So without AD, they have a chance. But LeBron is still got some issues there from the injuries during the regular season, and so yeah, it looks bad for them. I mean, when was the last time he actually went out in the first round? It must be about 10, 12 years ago or something, because
he's
he's
never
always
lost.
done.
He's never lost in the first round.
Is he not? His second season, did he not lose? I'm sure he lost like his second season. He was out in the first round with the Cavs and the Gaskas and all that.
I'd
But
have to look it up, but yeah.
That's a long, long time ago. But he is someone who aspires to be the best, and I think this will hit him hard mentally if this is what happens. But he's going up against a team that brought in Chris Paul, and I am no big fan of Chris Paul by any stretch. I think the way he goes about his play is underhanded. I think he uses his position as the player rep president to kind of win favor with refs and stuff. So I see that all the time, and he nips at refs all the time, and it just his play just gets he just bores me. Like if he cut all that crap out and he just played the game, he's actually a really, really good technical player. But all the kind of referee stuff just really annoys me. But with him and Booker and Aiton, that is a solid, solid team, and they've done so well. And there was a time there where we weren't going to finish top of the NBA because the Phoenix Suns were hot on our tails. So I think the Phoenix Suns could do the unthinkable, and LeBron could be going home early.
Yeah, that's true. And for me personally, I said in the last podcast, and I kind of want to get your thoughts on this as well, is we see this shift, this I'm stuttering my words right now, this hypothetical shift, basically where, all the greats have had to do this. Jordan, Malone, Magic, Kareem, sometimes even Kobe, where at a certain age, they realize their bodies can't do what they used to do. So they have to shift their game just a little bit to be able to stay competitive. And we've seen them, do that with really good success. What do you think LeBron needs to do, in your opinion, to make that shift so that he can stay relatively competitive for the next 5 years?
I think he needs to trust his guys. And I think he needs to stop this almost like a recruitment drive. We've seen it in Cleveland. He started bringing in all the guys that were under his Maverick Carter's management. And then he moved to the Lakers, and we've seen a little bit of that again. Obviously, the whole AD thing with demanding a trade and then going to the Lakers. That trade, I actually believe, yes, they won a championship last year out of it, but I think long term, that was a bad move because you look at those players, such as Jordan Clarkson, who just won six man. You know what? They just gave him up for nothing, or one championship. But I think they decided. Jeannie Buss must have decided. You know what? We're going to win now, and that's what we're going to do. We're just going to take LeBron. We're going to take AD. And to hell with it. We'll try and build a core around them. And we've seen what's happened with that. That's faltered because what I've always respected about the Golden State Warriors, they built their team through the draft. They traded, they got free agents, and they built a team over time. And that team became very successful. Same with Spurs. Yeah, I mean, obviously, they maybe tanked a little to get Tim Duncan. But, for the most part, they built that team from scratch. I kind of liken it to like the Premier League in England. What they do is a big new owner will come in with a couple billion. He'll buy players just for the sake of buying players because he doesn't want other teams to have them. And they basically buy the Premier League title. Chelsea have done it. Manchester City have done it. And that's effectively what the Lakers have done. They basically just bought up the best talent that's around. And I think the difference is with American sports is there's a salary cap. And that really has hindered the Lakers. In the UK, there are some rules, very lackadaisical rules, but you can come in as a billionaire, buy a team, and just spend,
Yeah.
and get away with it.
Yeah. James Scott of the Across the Pond Sports podcast joining me. Let's shift topics a little bit here. There's been a lot of talk, a lot of discussion as we're heading into the training camp portion of the NFL offseason. Aaron Rodgers specifically has been making all sorts of news. The threat of him, having played his last game ever in a Packers uniform seems very real, especially now that they've acquired Blake Bortles. Do you think Aaron Rodgers is coming back? And if not, what do you think happens from here with both Rodgers and the Packers?
Well, first of all, we have to call him Sir Blake Bortles.
He's been knighted.
Oh yeah, I mean he comes over to when he was with the Jags, he was over to England like more than the Queen. So he is he's actually quite a popular figure with UK fans because the Jags were the team that came over every year, sometimes twice a year. So the fans in the UK kind of got used to him. So he did get this kind of Sir Blake Bortles kind of title, which is it's just a bit of fun, but we love it. And he is a decent quarterback. He's not a world beater, but he's a decent quarterback. For me, though, I think this has been on the cards since the Packers drafted a quarterback last year.
Yeah,
we've seen very, very angry Aaron Rodgers all season long, going out to prove to the ownership of the Packers that they did something really stupid. You didn't give him a wide receiver. You gave him a quarterback. So I think last year he played really angry. That showed. But also what I noted last season was usually with young guys, if they made a mistake, he would shout them out and call them out in the media and like, oh, that guy's just useless and whatever. Whereas this time there was a particular play with one of the young players where he got asked about the particular play that this player had kind of messed up on and cost him a game. And he said, that's fine, he'll get it next week. And that was a shift in Rodgers because we haven't seen that from Rodgers because usually he's a bit moody. And he supports his team, but I think, there is this kind of, oh, for God's sake, why couldn't he just like pick up the ball? So I think for me, I think there's a change in mindset from Rodgers, and I think he's seen the writing on the walls, and he's been brushing up his image over the last season because I think he could see himself that the writing is on the wall, and he's going to move. Where he moves to, I'm hearing the Broncos are a big possibility as to where he would end up. They've got Drew Lock, and Drew Lock is good, is young, and is probably someone that could learn from Aaron Rodgers over the next couple of years before Rodgers hangs it up. So I think he will go to the Broncos. I think he is done in Green Bay as much as the ownership in Green Bay say he isn't. I think he is. I think he's done.
Yeah. Do you think, though, that the Broncos are going to get, risk getting that image of where great quarterbacks go to retire, because they've done Peyton Manning, they've done Joe Flacco, and now the rumor is Aaron Rodgers is going to be traded there. Denver's going to get this reputation of, this is where all the great quarterbacks, go to spend their final years, basically.
Yeah, and you know what? The Broncos would be a good team at this stage for a good quarterback because they have a good defensive line. The
Yeah.
offensive line is pretty much all coming back as well, so they've got a year under their belts altogether. So I think, like Manning walked into a team that was already kind of pre-built, and he just slotted in. Obviously, he had his injury issues with his neck and stuff like that, but they still were awesome. And I think Aaron Rodgers in Denver would be amazing. I know my co-host Katie Brinkley. She's from Denver and she's a huge Broncos fan. She would be over the moon. I've been joking with her, pulling her leg that he's never going to go to Denver. Denver could never afford to take on Aaron Rodgers. But I think from what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing is that Denver would be the place. And like you said, I never actually thought about that. The place where quarterbacks go to have one last hurrah almost. And that could be fun for Rodgers. And Rodgers could be thinking that too.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, James Scott joining us from the Across the Pond Sports Podcast. One other big name in the NFL that's been making waves very recently is Falcons wideout Julio Jones. Saying he wants out of Atlanta, he wants to contend for a title as well. Is there a realistic landing spot for a guy like Julio Jones that makes that much money? And if so, what do you think it will take to acquire said wide receiver?
I think for Julio Jones, we're in a different situation from Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers is battle tested and he's a winner and a proven winner. Julio Jones, last season was a real bust for him. And I think moving forward, I think he has some reputation building to be doing. I don't think he's doing this the right way. It almost reminds me of James Harden leaving the Rockets.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to stamp up and down and throw temper tantrums until you let me go. And I don't think teams are into that. There is one place that he could end up because if you look at redemption stories, New England are good for that, for giving players a second chance. And Bill Belichick could do with another receiver. So that could be a way to go. Or there is talk of the Chicago Bears being involved as well. But it's all going to depend on how much you have to give up to actually acquire them.
Yeah. One receiver that, just struck my mind, being kind of like a historian and a longtime fan. And, some of you've heard this before, Terrell Owens.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, Terrell Owens. Wow. It's funny. I've been in I'm on Clubhouse and I've been in a couple of Clubhouse rooms with Terrell Owens and listened to him. And man, that guy's a genius. And yeah, he was he is probably hot-headed and stuff. And it's what landed him in so much trouble over the years.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, I like the comparison. The comparison's good. I think Jones, though, I don't think has as much circumstances as T.O. T.O. was all talk all the time, and he'd come out in the media and stuff. And Julio Jones, I don't think he has that kind of gravitas. I don't think he has that kind of charisma.
Yeah.
But in terms of play, I think they're pretty close.
Yeah, it's true. All right, James Scott of the Across the Pond Sports Podcast. One last topic, well, two last topics. So I'm probably going to come off as one of those brash, arrogant, maybe even ignorant American sports fans. But I'm also a big fan of soccer, football. I've followed my high school teams, for years, even after I graduated. I celebrated when the local team here, Real Salt Lake, won the MLS Cup years ago. I've even followed the MLS for a number of years. So 2 questions, since I review you as a expert in British sports. One, is the football experience in Europe as intense and as much of a religious experience as it's made out to be here in the States? And 2, if I were to be that tourist, and one day come and visit, which team should I root for?
So, religious experience, in the UK, football is a religion. Now, there's two parts to this. There's the football part, and then there's actual religion. Now, I come from Scotland, and I was born in a city called Glasgow,
Ooh,
where you have a green side and a blue side. So you have Celtic and you have Rangers. Rangers are British Protestant team, and
right.
Celtic are Irish Catholic team. And for generations, these teams have played football, and there has historically always been issues after games, with violence and all this kind of stuff. And it's the kind of side of football that no one likes. No one
Yeah.
enjoys to see that kind of side of things. It has got a lot better over the last 10, 15 years. When I was a kid, I remember my mum saying, "Oh, it's an old firm." They call it an old firm game. It's a derby game, when it's Rangers Celtic, and my mum would basically lock the windows and doors. You'd almost board them up because you knew that there was going to be fighting in the streets and riots and whatever else. And it didn't matter which team won. It was just going to, whichever team it was, it didn't really matter. We have seen a change in that. Laws have been brought in, and they change kickoff times to so people can't just go out and drink alcohol, and consume loads of it. So it has cooled down a lot, thankfully, and it is a lot more about the football. But it has been like that for a long time. In terms of actually the religion of football itself, football is very sacred to British people, and it is something that when you grow up, when you're 4, 5, 6 years old, you go play for a soccer team. Like that's where you go. You go play for a soccer team, and you come through the age groups, and eventually, hopefully, if you're very, very, very lucky, you get to play professionally. Now, the number of kids that start off at 4 or 5 years old playing soccer to those that turn pro is very few and far between, and that's simply because it's cheaper to buy in an import from Europe than it is to have someone come through all these age groups, and it costs lots of money. So it doesn't happen too often, but when it does, it's great. Um, in terms of finding a team, it's a tough one. See, it depends where you go. If you go to Scotland and north of the border, then you've got your Edinburgh teams, your Glasgow teams, which I mentioned, and you can even go as
All right.
far north as Aberdeen. Um, but if you're looking at Premier League, which probably most people are, then it is a tough one. I mean, you could be an absolute kind of what we call glory hunter and go after one of the top teams. You could go after Manchester United, a Manchester City, a Chelsea, and you could go follow them, which would be a nice experience. However, the tickets when you go see them are quite expensive.
Yeah.
Or you could be like me. I'm an Everton fan. Everton are based in Liverpool. Obviously, you do have Liverpool Football Club as well, who are a storied franchise. But I always liked Everton because Everton always had a good group of Scottish players. And at one time they had Landon Donovan from the States on their team, which was good. He was only here for half a season, but it was good to see an American play. But that's one thing that I've always enjoyed is when the American players come over. Clint Dempsey played at Fulham, which is not a very big team in London. Not a Chelsea, not an Arsenal. They are a very small team, but he played there for years and had a great career. And he took them and won a European Cup. So he's beloved by Fulham fans. Rangers, who are the Scottish equivalent, they've had many American players. Claudio Reyna, Morris Edu, what's his Bedoya. I mean, they've had tons of American players come through as well,
Wow.
and it's great. It's great to have American soccer players come over. But if you want to pick a team, it's a tough one. I went for Everton because they had a bunch of Scottish players at the time, and they tend to recruit Scottish players quite a lot. So if you were going to go down the American route, and try and pick a team that had a couple of Americans on it, unfortunately, you're probably not looking at the Premier League. You're probably looking at division below, to try and find a couple. At the moment, it's been a bit tougher.
Yeah. Like I said, I'm trying not to be that tourist, too obvious. Picking like the Lakers because they're the Lakers and all the championships or whatever. Trying to pick something that's a little bit more close to what I'm used to, I guess.
Well, that's the thing. Like when I was a kid growing up, I mean, I've supported the Jazz since the early 90s. And when I was at school playing basketball, everyone went to training or whatever practice with Chicago Bulls jerseys or Lakers jerseys or at the time Magic jerseys. And I was like, oh, I'm a Jazz fan. And people would be like, who are they? Because everyone knew who the Knicks were, the Heat were, the Lakers, the Bulls. Everyone knew who they were. Now, obviously, the Bulls because of Michael Jordan at the time,
Yeah.
so everyone knew them. But I mean, for me, growing up as a Jazz fan in Scotland, I was the only one. So, out of the 7 million people that live in this country, I was probably the only one. I now have confirmed two others in Scotland,
Nice.
but so we are growing. It's taken some time. But the jazz organization's always been good for me. And I've got family and friends in Utah, and I spent a lot of summers in Utah when I was a kid. So it was an obvious choice for me because that's where I was, that's the team that I would choose. And it didn't matter to me that they hadn't won a title. It didn't matter to me that they weren't in Los Angeles or New York. It just mattered to me that they were kind of the family team that you would support.
Yeah. And that's kind of the appeal that I had towards the Jazz, other than, being so close to where they play and whatnot. All right. So, final question, and probably the most important one. What is the Across the Pond Sports Podcast, and where can it be found?
So, Across the Pond Sports Podcast is just a small part of what we do. It's part of Across the Pond Sports Network. I started the sports podcast back in July of last year, not because I was bored during lockdown. I actually had to work through lockdown as an engineer, so I didn't get any time off. I decided to start a podcast because some friends of mine did, and I thought, I could give that a go. So I did. And, I started off monologuing, covering NBA, NFL and stuff. And then it kind of grew from there. I got a co-host to cover the NFL with me, Katie Brinkley. And I got another co-host to cover the NBA with me, and Ryan Doherty. And we just kind of went for it. And then when January came around, and obviously the new seasons were going to start, the NHL, I had two guys come to me, can we do NHL? And so I basically created Across the Pond NHL podcast. That's been going really, really well. It's a really popular podcast. And then I thought, well, if I can do that, sure, we can do another one. So I got some guys to do Across the Pond MLB podcast. So that's been moving along since the start of the season. And then this will be a nice announcement for you, but we're going to launch Across the Pond WNBA podcast in the next 2 weeks to cover the WNBA. And even better, I've managed to get a hold of a former WNBA player to be my co-host, and Michelle Snow. So former All-Star, future Hall of Famer, I'm going to call her. But she's going to come be my co-host. And we're gonna start putting out some WNBA content because I think it's very undervalued, the WNBA now. There was the Stars in Utah for a while, didn't last very long, but I think the women's game is actually getting more popular, and not just in America. I think it's getting more popular worldwide, especially when you see a lot of these women players go off to Europe and play, which is what a lot of them do, because the WNBA season is quite short, really, in comparison to the NBA or the NHL or MLB, especially. It's 162 games, but so it's really a short season. So, and they don't get paid as much as the men either. So they go abroad, and actually, you know what? They get paid more abroad than they do at home, which is the crazy thing. So, we're going to be covering the WNBA, and it's a project I've been working on for a while, and really looking forward to getting that off the ground and getting some episodes out.
That's awesome. That's a great announcement and an excellent way to cap off this awesome chat, this conversation. James Scott, host of the Across the Pond Sports Podcast, member of the Across the Pond Sports Network. You can find him pretty much wherever: Stitcher, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, just all the stuff.
Everywhere.
Yeah. All right, sir. You have been very kind to stay up this late to chat with me. Go get some rest, and I will definitely give your podcast a listen for sure later this afternoon.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me, man.
All right. Thank you. Based on the fabled short story from Edgar Allan Poe, and from the creative and brilliant mind of McLean Lundquist, comes the most frightening deep dive into the Sea of Madness. The Telltale Heart has already won multiple awards, including Best Sound Editing and Best Actor in Senny Grimsley at the Indie Shorts Film Festival, as well as the coveted Diamond Award for Best Short Film at the Minefield Film Festival in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And just this past week, the Telltale Heart even won Best Utah Short at the Film Quest Film Festival in Provo, Utah. Revisit Edgar Allan Poe's short story, as this film brings more than just a classic horror story to a new audience, but also discovers a creative way to explore the groundbreaking psychological thriller. The narrative is enhanced through an unprecedented use of sounds and light, and the characters blend in modern sensibility with anachronistic charm, as seen through an unsettling array of time and space, while a shifting setting disorients the unwitting audience. What is seen and what is heard leads the perplexed audience to ask, what is insanity and what truly constitutes reality? TelltaleMovie.com for more information on this brilliantly insane thriller. The Closing Tag is honored to have them as a sponsor of the podcast. Boom! One take, no mistakes. That's all the time we have today, guys. I want to thank everyone for watching the archive videos on YouTube and on Facebook, and for downloading the pod. Links are all in the description for the Facebook and YouTube pages. Every view, every download, every listen counts. So again, I always say this at the end of every episode, but thank you. A reminder, this podcast is sponsored by Galactic Blue, your professional web development, graphic design, and logo design resource. Visit galacticblue.net for more information on how your business can benefit from our services, as well as the Telltale Heart, the indie short film that's just sweeping all the film festivals. They won some more awards recently. So, visit telltalemovie.com for more info on where you may be able to find it in your area. If you would like to donate either equipment or money, we don't have a Patreon yet, but I am always open to suggestions. Hit me up at raul@galacticblue.net. I know it's cliche, but without your support, I could not do the podcast. So thank you. We are on Apple Podcasts, Pandora, Spotify, Stitcher, Amazon Music, and many other podcast providers. Our video of each podcast can be found on the dedicated YouTube channel as well as our Facebook page. Again, links are all in the description. And I just wanted to say, next week, next week in regards to June 7th, let's just throw the date out there. June 7th, we will be starting the website design and implementation for the Closing Tag website that will house all the stuff, that will house our archived audio, that will house our archived video. We'll still have the Facebook page and the YouTube, obviously. It'll have links to those, so I can stop saying links are in the description. Just go to the website. Yeah. It'll house all of that. It'll house links to where you may be able to find it on the various podcast providers, upcoming events, upcoming schedules, all of that. So tune in to twitch.tv/galacticblue1 this coming Monday, June 7th. We are going to be starting this awesome journey, and I hope that all of you will join with us. So again, thank you guys so much for listening and for watching, and thank you to James Scott for coming on the show and for being an awesome sport. And as always, remember to include your closing tags.
On that, our presentation.